outside that you guys couldn't hear or see me. So I guess I'll start over, and I apologize for the delay. So, welcome to Bucket and Books. I'm PerniciousDuke. I'll be reading Chapter 10 of this mission log, Halo, Fall of Reach. Since I've already been in this for quite a while, I'm going to go ahead and just get back into it. Thanks that I... Glad you guys can see me now. So just a heads up, we were using a third-party streaming service to be able to have other people do this easier, and apparently it did not work very well, so hopefully we can fix that for future streams. Alright, Chapter 10. 1210 hours, September 14th, 2525, military calendar. Eridanus System, Eridanus 2 Space Dock. Civilian cargo ship Laden, registry number, Foxtrot 0980 Whiskey. Spartan 117 in position. Next check-in at 0400. John clicked off the microphone, encrypted the message, and fed it into his comm relay. He triggered a secure burst transmission to the Athens, the Oni prowler ship, on station a few UA's distance. He and his team climbed onto the upper girders. In silence, the team rigged a weapon of support nets, so they could rest in relative comfort. Below them lay 100,000 liters of black water, and surrounding them 2 centimeters of stainless steel. Sam rigged the fill sensor so the reservoir's computer wouldn't let any more water flow into the storage tank. The lights on their helmet cast a pattern of cross and crisscrossing reflection lines. A perfect hiding spot, all according to plan, John thought, and allowed himself a small grin of triumph. The tech specs that Oni had procured on the Laden showed a number of hydroponic pods mounted around the ship's carousel system, something not uncommon for this class. The massive water tanks used gravity feed to irrigate the ship's space-grown crops. Perfect. They had easily slipped past the lone guard in the Laden's main cargo bay and into the nearly deserted center section. The water tank would mask their thermal signatures and block any motion sensors. The only risky element entered the picture if the center section stopped spinning. Things could get very messy inside the tank very fast, but John doubted that would happen. I'm going to check to make sure you guys can still see and hear me. Alright, cool. I see some text there. Kelly set up a tiny microwave relay outside the top hatch. She propped her data pad on her stomach and linked to the ship's network. "I'm in," she reported. "There's no AI or serious encryption. Accessing their systems now." She tapped the pad a few more times and activated the intrusion software, the best that Oni could provide. A moment later, the pad pulsed to indicate success. "They've got a nav trajectory to the asteroid belt. ETA is 10 hours. "Good work," John said. "Team, we'll sleep in shifts." Sam and Fred and Linda snapped off their flashlights. The tank reverberated as the Laden's engines flared to life. The water tilted as they accelerated away from the orbital docking station. John remembered Iridius too, vaguely recalled that it was once home. He wondered if his school, his family, were still there. He squelched his curiosity. Speculation made for a fine mental exercise, but the mission came first. He had to stay alert. Or, failing that, grab some sleep so he would be alert when he needed to be. Chief Mendez must have told them 1,000 times, rest can be as deadly a weapon as a pistol or grenade. "I've got something," Kelly whispered, and handed her datapad. It displayed the cargo manifest for the Laden. John scrolled down the list. Water, flour, milk, frozen orange juice, welding rods, superconducting magnets for a fusion reactor. No mention of any weapons. "I give up," he said. "What am I looking for?" "I'll give you a hint," Kelly replied. "The chief smokes them." John flicked back through the list. There. Sweet William cigars. Next to them on the manifest was a crate of champagne, a Proxian vintage. They were fast-chilled New York steaks and Swiss chocolates. These items were stored in a secure locker. They had the same routing codes. "Luxury items," Kelly murmured. "I bet they're headed straight for a special delivery to Colonel Watts or his officers." "Good work," John replied. "We'll tag this stuff and follow it." Won't be that easy, Fred said from the darkness. He flicked on his flashlight and peered back at John. There are a million ways this can go wrong. We're going to without recon. I don't like it. We only have one advantage on this mission, John said. The rebels have never been infiltrated. They'll feel relatively safe and won't be expecting us. But every extra second we stay, that's another chance for us to be spotted. We'll follow Kelly's hunch. You questioning orders? Sam asked Fred. Scared? There was a slight hint of a challenge in his voice. Fred thought for a moment. No, he whispered. But this is no training mission. Our targets won't be firing stun rounds. He sighed. I just don't want to fail. We're not going to fail, John told him. We've accomplished every mission we've ever been on. That wasn't entirely true. The augmentation mission had wiped out half of the Spartans. They weren't invincible. But John wasn't scared. A little nervous, maybe, but he was ready. Rotate sleep cycles, John said. Wake me up in 4 hours. He turned over and quickly nodded off to the sound of the sloshing water. He dreamed of Gravball and a coin spinning in the air. John caught it and yelled, Eagle, as he won again. He always won. Kelly nudged John's shoulder, and he was instantly awake, hand on his assault rifle. We're decelerating, she whispered, and pointed her light into the water below. The liquid tilted at a 20-degree inclination. Lights off, John ordered. They were plunged into total darkness. He popped the hatch and snaked the fiber optic probe, attached to his helmet, through the crack. All clear. They climbed out, then rappelled down back of the 10-meter-tall tank. They donned their grease-stained coveralls and removed their helmets. The black suits looked a little bulky underneath the work clothes, but the disguise would hold up to a curiosity inspection. With their weapons and gears in duffel bags, they'd pass as crew, from a distance. They crept through a deserted corridor and into the cargo bay. They heard a million tiny metallic pings as gravity settled the ship. The Laden must be docking to a spinning station or a rotating asteroid. The cargo bay was a huge room, stacked to its ceilings with barrels and crates. There were massive tanks of oil. Automated robot forklifts scurried between rows, checking for items that might have come loose in transit. There was a terrific clang as a docking clamp grabbed the ship. Cigars are this way, Kelly whispered. She consulted her datapad, then tucked it back into her pocket. They moved out, clinging to the shadows. They stopped every few meters, listened, and made sure their field of fire was clear. Kelly held up her hand and made a fist. She pointed to the secure hatch on the starboard side of the hold. John signaled Fred and Kelly and motioned them to forward. Fred used the lock breaker on the door, and it popped open. They entered and closed it behind them. John, San, and Linda waited. There was a sudden motion, and the Spartans snapped their weapons to firing positions. A robot forklift passed down an adjacent aisle. The massive aft doors to the cargo hold parted with a hiss. Lights spilled into the hold. A dozen dock workers, dressed in coveralls, entered. John gripped his MA-2B tighter. One man looked down the aisle where they were crouched in the shadows. He stooped and paused. John raised his weapon slowly, his hands steady and sighted on the man's chest. Always shoot for center mass, Mendez had barked during weapons training. The man stood, stretched his back, and moved on, whistling quietly to himself. Fred and Kelly returned, and Kelly opened and closed her hand, palm out. She had placed the marker. John grabbed his helmet from his duffel bag and slipped it on. He pinged the navigation marker and saw the blue triangle flash once on his heads-up display. He returned Kelly's thumbs up and removed his helmet. John stowed his helmet and MA-2B and motioned for the rest of the team to do the same. They casually walked out of the Laden's aft cargo hold and onto the rebel base. The docking bay was hewn from solid rock. The ceiling stretched a kilometer high. By the way, this is the first sentence I haven't read twice tonight, so this is how far I got, for those of you that asked. The docking bay was hewn with solid rock. The ceiling stretched a kilometer high. Bright lights overhead effectively illuminated the place, looking like tiny suns in the sky. There were hundreds of ships docked within the cavern, tiny single-craft Mako-class corvettes, cargo freighters, and even a captured UNSC Pelican dropship. Each craft was held by massive cranes that traveled on railroad tracks. The tracks led towards a series of large airlock doors. That's how the Nylund must have gotten inside. There were people everywhere, workers and men in crisp white uniforms. John's first instinct was to seek cover. Every one of them was a potential threat. He wished he had his gun in hand. He remained calm and strode among these strangers. He had to set the right example for his team. If his recent encounter with the ODSTs in the gym of the Atlas had been any indication, he knew his team wouldn't interact well with the natives. John made his way past dock workers and robotic trams full of cargo and vendors selling roasted meat on sticks. He walked down toward a set of double doors set in far rock wall, marked Public Showers. He pushed through and didn't look back. The place was almost empty. One man was singing in the shower, and there were 2 rebel officers undressing near the towel dispensers. John led his team to the most distant corner of the locker room and hunkered down on one of the benches. Linda sat with her back to them, on lookout duty. "So far, so good," John whispered. "This will be our fallback position if everything else fails and we get separated." Sam nodded. "Okay, we have a lead on how to find the colonel. Anyone have any ideas how to get off this rock once we grab him? Back into the Nylund's water tank?" "Too slow," Kelly said. "We've got to assume that when Colonel Watts goes missing, his people are going to look for him." "There was a Pelican on the dock," John said. "We'll take it. Now let's figure out how to operate the cranes and airlocks." Sam hefted his pack of explosives. "I know just the way to politely knock on those airlock doors. Don't worry." Sam tapped his left foot. He only did that when he was eager to move. Fred's hands were clenched into fists. He might be nervous, but he had it under control. Kelly yawned, and Linda sat absolutely still. They were ready. John got his helmet, donned it, and checked the nav marker. "Bearing 320, he said. "It's on the move." He picked up his gear, and so are we. They left the showers and strode through the dock, past massive drop doors, and into a city. This part of the asteroid looked like a canyon carved into the rock. John could barely make out the ceiling far overhead. There were skyscrapers and apartment buildings, factories, and even a small hospital. John ducked into an alley, slipped on his helmet, and pinpointed the blue nav marker. It overlay a cargo tram that silently rolled down the street. There were 3 armed guards riding in the back. The Spartans followed at a discreet distance. John checked his exit routes. Too many people and too many unknowns. Were the people here armed? Would they all engage if fighting started? A few of the people gave him strange looks. "Spread out," he whispered to his team. "We look like we're in a parade ground." Kelly stepped up her pace and pulled ahead. Sam fell behind. Fred and Linda drifted to the left and right. The cargo trams turned and made its way slowly through a crowded street. It stopped at a building. The structure was 12 stories tall, with balconies on every floor. John guessed these were barracks. There were 2 armed guards in white uniforms at the front entrance. The 3 men in the tram got out and carried the crate inside. Kelly glanced at John. He nodded, giving her the go-ahead. She approached the 2 guards, smiling. John knew her smile wasn't friendly. She was smiling because she was finally getting a chance to put her training to the test. Kelly waved to the guard and pulled open the door. He asked her to stop and show her identification. She stepped inside, grabbed his rifle, twisted, and dragged him inside with her. The other guard stepped back and leveled his rifle. John sprang at him from behind, grabbed his neck and snapped it, and then dragged his limp body inside. The entry room had cinderblock walls and a steel door with a swipe card lock. A security camera dangled limply over Kelly's head. The guard she had dragged in lay at her feet. She was already running a cracking program on the lock, using her datapad. John retrieved his MA-2B and covered her. Fred and Linda entered and slipped out of their coveralls, then donned their helmets. "Nav marker is moving," Linda reported. Mark 270, elevation 10 meters, 20, 35, and holding. I'd say that's the top floor. Sam entered, pulled the door shut behind him, and then jammed the lock. All clear out there. The inner door clicked. Doors open, Kelly said. John, Kelly, and Sam slipped out of their coveralls as Fred and Linda covered them. John activated the motion and thermal displays in his helmet. The targeting sight glowed as he raised his MA2B. Go, John said. Kelly pushed open the door. Linda stepped in and to the right. John entered and took the left. 2 guards were seated behind the lobby's reception desk. Another man, without a uniform, stood in front of the desk, waiting to be helped. 2 more uniformed men stood by the elevator. Linda shot the 3 near the desk. John eliminated the targets by the elevator. 5 rounds, 5 bodies hit the floor. Fred entered and policed the bodies, dragging them behind the counter. Kelly moved to the stairwell, opened the door, and gave the all-clear signal. The elevator pinged and its doors opened. They all wheeled, rifles leveled, but the car was empty. John exhaled, then moved, motioning to them to take the stairs. Kelly took point. She brought up the rear. They silently went up 9 double flights of stairs. Kelly halted on an upper landing. She pointed to the interior building, then pointed up. John detected faint blurs of heat on the 12th floor. They'd have to pick a better route, a way in that no one would expect. John opened the door. There was an empty hallway, no targets. He went to the elevator door and pried them open. Then he turned on his black suit's cooling elements to mask his thermal signature. The others did the same and faded from his thermal imaging display. John and Kelly climbed up the elevator cable. John glanced down a 30-meter plunge into darkness. He might survive that fall. His bones wouldn't break, but there would be internal damage, and he would certainly compromise their mission. He tightened his grip on the cable and didn't look down again. When they had climbed up the last 3 floors, they braced themselves in the corner by the closest elevator door. Kelly and Fred snaked up the cable after them. They braced up in the far corners to overlap the fields of fire. Linda came up last. She climbed as far as she could, hooked her foot on a cross brace, and hung upside down. John held up 3 fingers, 2, then 1. Then Sam silently pulled open the elevator doors. There were 5 guards standing in the room. They wore light body armor and helmets and carried older model HMG 38 rifles. 2 of them turned. Kelly, Fred, and Linda opened fire. The walnut paneling behind the guards became pockmarked with bullet holes and was splattered with blood. The team slid into the room, moving quickly and quietly. Sam policed the guards' weapons. There were 2 doors. One led to a balcony, the other featured a peephole. Kelly checked the balcony, then whispered over the channel in the helmets. This overlooks the alley behind buildings. No activity. John checked the nav marker. The blue triangles flashed a position directly behind the other door. Sam and Fred flanked the door. John couldn't get any reading on motions or thermal. The walls were shielded. There were too many unknowns and not enough time. The situation wasn't ideal. They knew they were at least 3 men inside and 1 who had carried the crate upstairs, and there might be more guards. And to complicate the situation, their target had to be taken alive. John kicked the door in. He took in the entire situation at a glance. He was standing on the threshold of a sumptuous apartment. There was a wet bar boasting shelves of amber-filled bottles. A large round bed dominated the corner, decorated with shimmering silk sheets. Windows on all sides had sheer white curtains. John's helmet automatically compensated for the glare. Red carpet covered the floor. The crate with the cigars and champagne sat in the center of the room. It was black and armored, sealed tight against the vacuum of space. There were 3 men standing behind the armored crate, and 1 man crouched behind them. Colonel Robert Watts, their package. John didn't have a clear shot. If he missed, he could hit the colonel. The 3 men, however, didn't have that problem. They fired. John dove to his left. He caught 3 rounds in his side, knocking the breath from his body. One bullet penetrated his black suit. He felt it ping off his ribs, and pain slashed through him like a red-hot razor. He ignored the wound and rolled to his feet. He had a clear line of fire. He squeezed the trigger once. A 3-round burst caught the center in the forehead. Sam and Fred wheeled around the doorframe. Sam high, Fred low. Their silenced weapons coughed, and remaining pair of guards went down. Watts remained behind the crate. He brandished his pistol. "Stop!" he screamed. "My men are coming. You think I'm alone? You're all dead. Drop your weapons." John crawled to the wet bar and crouched there. He willed the pain inside his stomach to go away. He signaled Sam and Fred and held up 2 fingers, pointed the fingers over his head. Sam and Fred fired a burst of rounds over Watts. He ducked. John vaulted over the bar and leapt up onto his quarry. He grabbed the pistol and wrenched it out of his hand, breaking the man's index finger and thumb. John snaked his arm around Watts' neck and choked and strangled the struggling man into near unconsciousness. Kelly and Linda entered. Kelly took out a syringe and injected Watts. This is a tough word here. Enough polypseudomorphine to help him sedate for the better part of a day. Fred fell back to cover the elevator. Sam entered and crouched by the window, watching the street below for any signs of trouble. Kelly went to John and peeled back his black suit. Her gloves were slick with his blood. "The bullet is still inside," she said, and bit her lower lip. "There's a lot of internal bleeding. Hang on." She dug a tiny bottle from her belt and inserted the nozzle into the bullet hole. This might sting a little bit. The self-sealing biofoam filled John's abdominal cavity. It also stung like 100 ants crawling through his innards. She pulled the bottle out and taped up the hole. "You're good for a few hours," she said, and then gave him a hand up. John felt shaky, but he'd make it. The foam would keep him from bleeding to death and stave off the shock, for a while at least. "Incoming vehicles," Sam announced. 6 men entered the building, 2 taking up position outside, but just the front. "Get our package inside that crate and seal it up," John ordered. He left the room, got his duffel bag, and went to the balcony. He secured a rope and tossed down 12 stories into the alley. He rappelled down, took a second scan of the alley for threats, then climbed his throat mic, then clicked his throat mic once. The all-clear signal. Kelly snapped a decent rig on the crate and pushed it off the balcony. It zipped down the line and thudded to a halt at the bottom. A moment later, the rest of the team glided down the rope. They quickly donned their coveralls. Sam and Fred carried the crate as they entered the adjacent building. They exited on the street a half block down and walked as quickly as they could back to the docks. Dozens of uniformed men ran from the dock towards the city. No one challenged them. They re-entered the now deserted public showers. "Everyone check your seals," John said. "Sam, you go ring the doorbell. Meet us on the dropship." Sam nodded and sprinted out of the building. Both packs of C12 looped around his shoulder. John took out the panic button. He triggered the green mode transmission and tossed it into an empty locker. If they didn't make it out, at least the UNSC would know where to find their rebel base. "Your suit is breached," Kelly reminded John. "We'd better get to the ship now before Sam sets off his fireworks." Linda and Fred checked the seals on the crate and then carried it out. Kelly took point and John brought up the rear. They boarded the Pelican dropship and John sized up their armaments. Dented and charred armor, a pair of old, outdated 40mm chain guns. The rocket pods had been removed. Not much of a war horse. There was a flash of lightning at the far end of the dock. The thunder rolled through the deck and through John's stomach. While John watched, a gaping hole materialized in the airlock door amid a cloud of smoke and shattered metal. Black space loomed beyond. With an ear-splitting roar, the atmosphere held in the docks abruptly transformed into a hurricane. People, crates, and debris were blasted out of the raged tear. John pulled himself inside the dropship and prepared to seal the main hatch. He watched as emergency doors descended over the breached airlock. There was a second explosion, and the drop door paused, then fell and clattered to the deck, crushing a light transport vessel underneath. Beneath them, large bay doors closed, sealing the docks off from the city. Dozens of workers still on the docks ran for their lives, but didn't make it. Sam sprinted across the deck, perfectly safe inside his sealed black suit. He cycled through the Pelican's emergency airlock. "Back doors open," he said with a grin. Kelly fired up the engines. The Pelican lifted, maneuvered through the dock, and then out through the blasted hole and into open space. She pushed the throttle to maximum burn. Behind them, the insurgent base looked like any other rock in the asteroid belt, but this rock was venting atmosphere and starting to rotate erratically. After 5 minutes at full power, Kelly eased the engines back. "We'll hit the extraction point in 2 hours," she said. "Check on our prisoner," John said. She popped open the crate. "The seal's held. Watts is still alive and has a steady pulse." "Good," John grunted. He winced as the throbbing pain of his side increased. "Something bothering you?" Kelly asked. "How's that biofilm holding up?" "It's fine," he said without even looking at the hole in his side. "I'll make it." He knew he should feel elated, but instead he just felt tired. Something didn't sit right about the operation. He wondered about all the dead dock workers and civilians back there. None of them were designated targets. And yet, weren't they all rebels on that asteroid? On the other hand, it was like the chief said. He had followed his orders, completed his mission, and gotten his people out alive. What more did he want? John stuffed his doubts deep in the back of his mind. "Nothing's wrong," he said, and squeezed Kelly's shoulder. John smiled. "What could be wrong? We won." That was chapter 10. Quite a long chapter. It's actually one of the most pages for all of the night reads. So thanks for sticking with it and hanging out with us. Yeah, I like the he smiles part. All right, let's do this. One more chapter. Chapter 11. 0600 hours, November 2nd, 2525 military calendar. Epsilon, Eridana System. Reach, UNSC Military. Complex, Planet Reach. John wondered who had died. The Spartans had been called to muster in their dress uniforms only once before. Funeral detail. The Purple Heart awarded to him after his last mission glistened on his chest. He made sure it was polished to high sheen. It took out against the black wool of his dress jacket. Occasionally, John would look at it and make sure it was still there. He sat in the third row of the amphitheater and faced the center platform. The other Spartans sat quietly on the concentric rings of risers. Spotlights flickered on the empty stage. He had been in Reach's secure briefing chambers before. This is where Dr. Halsey had told him they were going to be soldiers. This is where his life had changed, and he had been given a purpose. Chief Mendez entered the room and marched to the center platform. He, too, wore his black dress uniform as well. His chest was covered with silver and bronze stars, 3 Purple Hearts, the Red Legion of Honor Award, and a rainbow of campaign ribbons. He had recently shaved his head. The Spartans rose and stood at attention. Dr. Halsey entered. She looked older to John. The wrinkles at the corner of her eyes and mouth more pronounced. Streaks of gray in her hair. But her blue eyes were as sharp as ever. She wore gray slacks, a black shirt, and her glasses hung around her neck on a gold chain. "Vice Admiral on deck," Mendez announced. They all snapped straighter. A man 6 years, Dr. Halsey's seniors, strode to the stage. His short hair looked like a steel helmet. His gait had a strange loop in it. His gait had a strange lope to it, what crewmen called spacewalk, from spending too much time in microgravity. He wore a simple, unadorned black dress UNSC uniform. No medals or campaign ribbons. The insignia on his forearm of his jacket, however, was unmistakable the rank of Vice Admiral. "At ease, Spartans," he said. "I'm Vice Admiral Stanforth." The Spartans took their seats in unison. Dust swirled on stage and collected into a robed figure. Its face was obstructed within the shadows of its hood. John could discern no hands at the ends of its sleeves. "And this is Beowulf," Vice Admiral Stanforth said, as he gestured to the ghostly creature. Stanforth's voice was calm, but distaste was evident on his face. "He is our AI attaché with the Office of Naval Intelligence." He turned away from the AI. "We have several important issues to cover this morning, so let's get started." The lights dimmed. An amber sun appeared in the center of the room, with 3 planets to close orbit. "This is Harvest," he said. "Population of approximately 3 million. Although on the periphery of UNSC-controlled space, this world is one of our more productive and peaceful colonies." The holographic view zoomed in on the surface of the world and showed grasslands and forests and 1,000 lakes swarming with schools of fish. As of military calendar February 3 at 14:23 hours, the Harvest orbital platform made long-range radar contact with this object. A blurry outline appeared over the stage. Spectroscopic analysis proved inconclusive," Vice Admiral Stanforth said. "The object is constructed of materials unknown to us." A molecular absorption graph appeared on the side of the screen. Spikes and jagged lines indicated the relative proportions of elements. Beowulf raised a cloaked arm and the image darkened. The words "classified eyes only" appeared over the blackened data. Vice Admiral Stanforth shot a glare at the AI. "Contact with Harvest," he continued, "was lost shortly thereafter. The Colonel Military Administration sent the scout ship Argo to investigate. That ship arrived in system on April 20th. But other than a brief transmission to confirm their exit slipstreams positive, no further reports were made. In response, Fleet Command assembled a battle group to investigate. The group consisted of the destroyer Hercules, commanded by Captain Veridai, as well as frigates Arabia and Vostok. They entered the Epsilon Indy system on October 7th and discovered the following. The holograph of the planet Harvest changed. The lush fields and rolling hills transformed, morphing into a crater, barren desert. Thin gray sunlight reflected off a glassy crust. Heat wavered from its surface. Isolated regions glowed red. "This is what was left of the colony." The Vice Admiral paused for a moment to stare at the image, and then continued. "We assume that all inhabitants are lost. 3 million lives lost." John couldn't fathom the raw force it had taken to kill so many. For a moment he was torn between horror and envy. He glanced at the purple heart pinned to his chest and remembered his lost comrades. How did one simple bullet wound compare with so many wasted lives? He was suddenly no longer proud of the decoration. "And this is what the Hercules battle group found in orbit," Vice Admiral Stanforth told them. The blurry outline was still visible, hanging in the air, sharpened into a crisp focus. It looked smooth and organic, and the whole possessed an odd, opalescent sheen. It looked more like the carapace of an exotic insect than the metal hull of a spaceship. Recessed into the aft section were pods that pulsed with a purple-white glow. The prow of the craft was swollen like the head of a whale. John thought it possessed an odd, predatory beauty. "The unidentified vessel," the Vice Admiral said, "launched an immediate attack against our forces." Blue flashes strobed from the ship. Red motes of lights then appeared along its hull. Bolts of energy coalesced into a fiery smear against the blackness of space. The deadly flashes of light impacted on the Arabia, splashed across its hull. Its meter of metal plating instantly boiled away, and a plume of ignited atmosphere burst from the breach in the ship's hull. Those were pulse lasers, Vice Admiral Stanforth explained, and if this record is to be believed, some kind of self-guided, superheated plasma weapon. The Hercules and Vostok launched salvos of missiles towards the craft. The enemy's lasers shot them before they reached their target. The balance of the missiles impacted, detonated into blossoms of fire that quickly faded. The strange ship shimmered with a transparent silver coating, which then vanished. They also seemed to have some sort of reflective energy shield. Vice Admiral Stanforth took a deep breath, and his features hardened into a mask of grim resolve. The Vostok and Arabia were lost with all hands. The Hercules jumped out of the system, but due to the damage it sustained, it took several weeks for Captain Verity to make it back to Reach. These weapons and defensive systems are currently beyond our technology. Therefore, this craft is of non-human origins. He paused, then added, the product of a race with technology far in advance of our own. A murmur buzzed through the chambers. We have, of course, developed a number of first contact scenarios, the Vice Admiral continued, and Captain Verity followed our established protocols. We had hoped that contact with a new race would be peaceful. Obviously, this was not the case. The alien vessel did not open fire until our task force attempted to initiate communications. He paused, considering his words. Fragments of the enemy's transmissions were intercepted, he continued. A few words have been translated. We believe they are calling themselves the Covenant. However, before opening fire, the alien ship broadcast the following message in the clear. He gestured to Beowulf, who nodded. A moment later, a voice thundered from the amphitheater's speakers. John stiffened in his seat when he heard it. The voice from speakers sounded odd, artificially, strangely calm and formal, but laden with rage and menace. Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument. John was awestruck. He stood. Yes, Spartan? Stanforth said. Sir, is this a translation? No, the Admiral replied. They broadcast this to us in our language. We believe they use some kind of translation system to prepare the message, but it means they've been studying us for some time. John took his seat. As of November 1st, the UNSC has been ordered to full alert, Stanforth said. Vice Admiral Peston Cole is mobilizing the largest fleet action in human history to retake the Epsilon Indi system and confront this new threat. Their transmission made one thing perfectly clear. They're looking for a fight. Only years of military discipline kept John rooted to his seat. Otherwise, he would have stood up and asked to volunteer on the spot. He would have given anything to go and fight. This was the threat he and the other Spartans had been trained for all their lives. He was certain of that. Not scattered rebels, pirates, or political descendants. Because of this UNSC-wide mobilization, Vice Admiral Stanforth continued, your project schedule will be accelerated to its final phase, Project Mjolnir. He stepped away from the podium and clasped his hands behind his back. To that end, I'm afraid I have another unpleasant announcement. He turned to the chief. Chief Petty Officer Mendez will be leaving us to train the next group of Spartans. Chief? John grabbed at the edge of the razor. Chief Mendez had always been there for him, the only constant in the universe. Vice Admiral Stanforth might as well have told him that Reach was leaving the Epsilon Erde system. The chief stepped to the podium and clasped its edges. Recruits, he said, soon your training will be complete, and you will graduate to the rank of Petty Officer Second Class in the UNSC. One of the first things you will learn is that change is part of a soldier's life. You will make and lose friends. You will move. This is part of the job. He looked to his audience. His dark eyes rested on each of them. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with what he had saw. The Spartans are the finest group of soldiers I have ever encountered, he said. It has been a privilege to train you. Never forget what I've tried to teach you. Duty, honor, sacrifice for the greater good of humanity are the qualities that make you the best. He was silent for a moment, searching for more words, but finding none. He stood at attention and saluted. Attention, John barked. The Spartans rose as one and saluted the chief. Dismissed, Spartans, Chief Mendez said, and good luck. He finished his salute. The Spartans snapped down their arms. They hesitated and then reluctantly filled out. Not sure if you guys heard that. Dismiss, Spartans, Chief Mendez said, and good luck. He finished his salute. The Spartans snapped down their arms. They hesitated and then reluctantly filed out of the amphitheater. John stayed behind. He had to talk to Chief Mendez. Dr. Housey spoke briefly with the chief and the vice admiral. Then she and the vice admiral left together. Beowulf backed towards the far wall and faded away like a ghost. The chief gathered his hat, spotted John, and walked to him. He nodded to the hologram of the scorched colony, Harvest, still rotating in the air. One final lesson, petty officer, he said. What tactical options do you have when attacking a stronger opponent? Sir, John said, there are two options. Attack swiftly and with full force at their weakest point. Take them out quickly before they have a chance to respond. Good, he said. And the other option? Fall back, John replied. Engage in guerrilla actions or get reinforcements. The chief sighed. Those are the correct answers, he said. But it may not be enough to be correct this time. Sit, please. John sat, and the chief settled next to him on the riser. There is a third option. The chief turned his hat over in his hands, an option that others may eventually consider. Sir? Surrender, the chief whispered. That, however, is never an option for the likes of you and me. We don't have the luxury of backing down. He glanced up at Harvest, a glittering ball of glass, and I doubt that an enemy like this will let us surrender. I think I understand, sir. Make sure you do, and make sure you don't let anyone else give up. He gazed in the shadows beyond the center platform. Project Mjolnir will make the Spartans into something new, something I could never forge them into. I can't fully explain. That damned Oni spook is still here listening. Just trust Dr. Housey. The chief dug into his jacket pocket. I was hoping to see you before they shipped me out. I have something for you. He set a small metal disc on the riser between them. When you first came here, the chief said, you fought the trainers when they took this away from you. Broke a few fingers, as I recall. His chiseled features cracked into a rare smile. John picked up the disc and examined it. It was an ancient silver coin. He flipped it between his fingers. It has an eagle on one side, Mendez said. That bird is like you, fast and deadly. John closed his fingers around the quarter. Thank you, sir. He wanted to say that he was strong and fast because the chief had made him so. He wanted to tell him that he was ready to defend humanity against this new threat. He wanted to say that without the chief, he would have no purpose, no integrity, and no duty to perform. But John didn't have the words. He just sat there. Mendez stood. It has been an honor to serve with you. Instead of saluting, he held out his hand. John got to his feet, and he took the chief's hand, and they shook. It was a great deal of effort. Every instinct screamed at him to salute. Goodbye, Chief Mendez said. He turned briskly on his heel and strode from the room. John never saw him again. Well, that completes chapter 11. Quite a intense couple chapters there with some killing of insurrectionists and the explanation of the glassing of Harvest. excited to see what comes next. As I said before, I have never read this book, so I'm excited to see what happens. Well, I believe tomorrow we'll be reading by Ashura, and she'll be reading chapters 12 and 13. It's been a pleasure to be with you guys this evening, and look forward to a couple more. Take care. Be well. Oh, that's a sad story. So let's not get into that one right now. All right. Take care.